I was halfway across the country when I got the news. My phone buzzed as I shuffled through the airport security line, and I glanced at the message out of reflex. It was from my partner Damon, and his words were short, cold, and delivered with the casual malice of someone who thought they held all the power. Your parents sold your house. Don't bother coming back here. There's nothing for you. And by the way, I'm done. I stood there, bare feet on the smooth airport floor, belt draped over my arm and laptop awkwardly pressed to my chest. At first, I thought I must have misread. My house? The one I'd purchased 10 years ago with my own money? The place I'd painstakingly renovated room by room? The place I swore would never be pried from me by anyone? Sold? By my own parents? The entire scenario was so outrageous it bordered on comedic. I could feel my pulse in my ears, but I remained outwardly calm. This was my greatest strength. The ability to choke down shock and keep my head clear when the ground shifted beneath my feet. That trait had made me successful in business. It had also, ironically, led to Damon and my parents underestimating me, believing I was too mild-mannered and trusting to see their betrayal coming. But I had. Not fully, of course. I never imagined my parents would stoop so low as to forcibly sell my house while I was away. But I knew something was off in my personal life for a while now. There had been little signs, hushed phone calls my mother took in the other room, cryptic messages from my father telling me family is everything, when I asked him why he'd started rummaging through my financial files in my study. Damon frequently borrowed money from me and made weird suggestions about co-signing new loans. All these red flags started piling up, and months ago, a seed of suspicion sprouted in my mind. I was determined to keep calm, so I slid my phone back into my pocket. I gathered my belt, shoes, and carry-on with the forced patience of a Buddhist monk, stepped aside to lace up my sneakers, and walked to my gate as if I'd just received a text about the weather. Inside, my thoughts were spinning. When I settled into a plastic chair at the gate, I opened my phone again. There was a longer message from Damon explaining that he and my parents had decided it was best for me to start fresh somewhere else. The house's deed, which I had once placed under joint ownership with them to expedite some family business arrangement, had evidently been manipulated in my absence. They had found a cash buyer, someone who was all too happy to exploit the questionable circumstances to get a bargain. Damon was crowing triumphantly, as if he'd pulled off the greatest heist in local real estate history. He ended his text with a line that was so absurdly smug, I wanted to laugh out loud in the bustling terminal. You can always just buy another one, right? You're so good at making money. This is for the best. Trust us. Just buy another one. Right. As if a house were a disposable coffee cup, and as if that place wasn't more than just a property. Even so, my anger was overshadowed by a sense of grim satisfaction. The betrayal had come. The mask was off. And I had been quietly preparing for something like this since the day I noticed their first suspicious slip. I boarded my flight. Outwardly, I was composed, even managing a polite smile to the flight attendant who offered me peanuts and a plastic cup of soda. My mind, however, was a hurricane. I scrolled through my phone, reading every message carefully. My mother's cheerful allusions. We took care of everything, honey. You're going to be so relieved when you come home. My father's curt disclaimers. This is what's best for you. Don't argue about it. And Damon's final, we're done, clarion call. The sale's final. Don't step foot in that house again. Even though none of them said it outright, I could see exactly how they thought I would react. Devastated, cornered, helpless. They must have envisioned me bursting into tears, pleading, racing home in a flurry of panic, only to discover I had nowhere to go and no legal recourse. Then, presumably, I'd be forced to rely on them for a place to stay, or to give in to Damon's demands so I could keep a roof over my head. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Yes, I was the quiet one, the easygoing person who never liked to ruffle feathers. I had let my mother push me around with financial decisions, once or twice. I had let my father have some access to my property's documentation, trusting that he just wanted to help with taxes. And Damon? Well, I had loved him enough to ignore how suspicious he was acting, but that trust and meekness had come to an end months ago. As the plane took off, I stared out the window and felt the weight of finality. My parents and Damon had made a vile, calculated move. Their arrogance would be their undoing. Months before, I'd sensed trouble. I overheard a conversation between Damon and my father in my home office one afternoon, a conversation they thought I was too busy to catch. Damon was complaining about how stubborn I was for not wanting to sell the house. My father insisted I'd eventually see reason or could be pushed. That night, I took action. I made a quiet visit to my lawyer, Margaret Chu, a formidable woman known for her ruthless efficiency. She listened carefully to my concerns, then said something I'll never forget. If they try to manipulate ownership without your knowledge, you'll want ironclad evidence of forgery or conspiracy. Let's get your documents in order. Over the next weeks, we prepared. I changed my primary bank accounts to a newly established LLC, ironically named Bright Horizons, which I solely controlled. The old joint account Damon and I shared was left open, with a modest sum that I wouldn't miss. The deed to the house was complicated thanks to a partial trust I had once set up, but Margaret guided me through establishing a separate protective measure. I quietly filed a caution with the county registrar, noting that any real estate transaction involving my property would require my explicit, notarized consent. The effect was subtle. No bulletproof guarantee, but enough to create a paper trail that would trip up any unauthorized sale. I also left a hidden security camera in the living room that automatically uploaded footage to a cloud server. If anyone tried forging documents in my house or meeting prospective buyers behind my back, I'd have it on tape. So, I wasn't blindsided exactly. I expected some kind of betrayal, but I had underestimated how brazenly they go about it, forging or coaxing a sale while I was out of town. Still, if they believed the sale was final, they were in for a rude awakening. If they had fabricated my signature or tried to circumvent the legal caution, there would be severe consequences. I smiled to myself at 35,000 feet, imagining my father, my mother, and Damon preening like crows over the scraps of a victory they didn't fully own. While I was traveling for work, I occupied myself by gathering evidence. I forwarded Damon's texts to Margaret, screenshotted calls from my parents, and scoured local real estate listings. Sure enough, I found my house posted on a third-party site for sale under an address that had been changed slightly, so it wouldn't immediately show up in standard searches. The listing read, "Beautiful single-family home with recent renovations. Fast sale, cash only." The price was suspiciously low, but that's how they must have found a buyer so quickly. I pictured Damon giving potential buyers a grand tour. "Look at these hardwood floors, and the kitchen was just remodeled last year. You can get it at a steal." Overconfidence indeed. My parents probably stood behind him, offering reassurance that this was all perfectly legitimate, that the rightful owner, me, had agreed to this arrangement. They had no reason to believe I had already set up traps to catch them in this exact act. Meanwhile, Damon had apparently decided to bask in a new sense of independence and wealth, forgetting that my success wasn't simply a fluke or something that he had orchestrated. He'd always teased that I was too nice to survive in the real world, never suspecting I was miles ahead of him in cunning. As soon as my business trip ended, I requested an extra day's extension from my boss. I had a final stop to make before I confronted them, a visit to an attorney in the city where the forged sale took place, to confirm the status of any official paperwork. Sure enough, my name was still on record as the principal owner. Any changes were flagged as pending additional verification, thanks to the caution I had filed. That meant the new buyer had essentially thrown their money at a transaction that wasn't complete. They couldn't fully register the property under their name. Legally, my parents and Damon had put themselves in a precarious position. They had accepted money for a house they did not have the right to sell. If that wasn't enough, forging my signature on any final documents was a felony offense. Armed with this information, I traveled back home. I didn't go straight to the house. I stopped first at Margaret's office, where we compiled all the texts, emails, and video footage captured by my hidden camera. A trove of proof that my parents and Damon had conspired to push through this fraudulent deal. On camera, I had Damon bragging to my father, "We'll split the money from this buyer, then we can force me to crawl back." They always do what we say eventually. My father's voice in the background. "Yeah, we'll give them a small cut to keep the peace. In the end, they can always buy another place." Ironic how people's own words can bury them. We took the package to the local real estate board, whose officials paled at the clear evidence of wrongdoing. Then we swung by the district attorney's office to file a preliminary report. Finally, I drove out to my house, parking discreetly on the next street over. I approached quietly, slipping into the backyard. My heart pounded, but adrenaline and a sense of righteous anger propelled me forward. As I rounded the corner, I was shocked to see the garden, my once lush bed of flowers, trampled beyond recognition, and a big "sold" sign hammered into the ground. My father's voice rang out from inside, floating through an open window. "They're supposed to be in Hong Kong for another week. Plenty of time to finalize things." "They'd better not show up early," Damon said, "but even if they do, it's too late." I gave a mild knock on the back door. The conversation stopped. Damon opened it with an annoyed expression, probably assuming the prospective buyer had come to talk, or that it was some meddling neighbor. His face went white when he saw me. "Well, what are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I repeated, stepping inside. I managed a small, tight-lipped smile. "Well, this is my house." I swept past him into the living room. My parents were seated on the couch, sifting through a stack of paperwork. They froze in unison as I walked in, calm and collected, but clearly not the doormat they had expected. My mother's eyes darted to the side, while my father forced a cough and tried to stand tall. "You're back," he said in a forced, hearty tone. "We meant to call you." "You sold my house," I replied softly, "without my consent." My mother tried a pathetic attempt at damage control, plastering a sweet smile on her face. "We just wanted the best for you, sweetie. We thought you needed a fresh start. And you can buy a nicer one, can't you? You got so much success in your career. You'll be better off." I stood there, letting them ramble, letting Damon spew excuses about how we just needed the money for some family debts, and how You never would have agreed if we told you directly. Every line only dug them deeper into the pit. Then I calmly opened my bag and retrieved a handful of documents. This is a copy of the caution I filed with the registrar's office. It means that any sale made without my explicit notarized approval is void. That means your so-called buyer gave you a lot of cash for absolutely nothing. Also here, I said, handing them the transcripts of the recordings from the hidden camera, and texts and emails, all verifying exactly what you did. I held my parents in a long, steady gaze. Do you have any idea the legal storm you just called down on yourselves? Money laundering, real estate fraud, forgery, conspiracy. Should I go on? They sputtered. My father's face turned beet red, and my mother began trembling. Damon looked like he might faint. Over their shoulders, I noticed a couple of suitcases stacked in the corner, probably stuffed with the money they had gained from this sale. It would take time to unravel everything, but in that moment, the power shifted completely. A flicker of fear crossed all of their faces, the instant recognition that they had miscalculated me. They had toyed with the assumption that I was a naive doormat. Now, they stared down the barrel of a legal and financial nightmare of their own creation. I didn't demand they be dragged out to the curb that same day. Instead, I told them they had 24 hours to clear out. The buyer who had purchased my house would need to be informed that the transaction was illegitimate. I would be pressing charges unless a full refund was given to the buyer, along with an apology. As for the district attorney's office, they already had the file with everything needed to open a case. My parents and Damon were free to negotiate or seek their own counsel, but they would not be stepping foot in my property again once the day was done. "You can't do this," Damon shouted at one point, the bravado in his voice cracking. "We're your family. You can't throw us out on the street." "You're not my spouse anymore," I reminded him quietly. "Remember your text? I'm done? That's exactly what you told me. You want out. Now you have it. Out of my property, out of my finances, out of my life." He flinched. My father glared as if he might physically lash out, but my mother tugged him back. They were cornered, and they knew it. I won't lie. Part of me trembled with rage and heartbreak. My own parents, and the person I had loved and shared my home with, had tried to steal the place I'd poured my soul into. But there was a sharper, purer feeling within me. Triumph. Not the gloating type, not the petty, I told you so. This was the satisfaction that came from surviving a betrayal and emerging stronger. They filed out the next day, shoving suitcases and boxes into a rented U-Haul, all while furtively looking around as if expecting the police to storm the place. And perhaps the local authorities would have, if not for the arrangement Margaret and I had made with the buyer's attorney. Full restitution of the buyer's money in exchange for a bit of leniency. We'd let the courts decide any additional penalties for the forgeries. Either way, my parents and Damon faced serious repercussions, lawsuits, possible criminal charges. I didn't relish their downfall, but I felt no sympathy for people who had conspired to ruin me. In the following months, my name was cleared of any black marks. I hired a security company to change every lock and run a thorough sweep of the house. Most of my personal belongings remained intact, though a few valuables had vanished. Margaret suspected Damon sold them off. This, too, went into the legal claim. I hardly cared. I realized that objects can be replaced. Peace of mind cannot. Meanwhile, I focused on my work. My boss, impressed by how quickly I'd resolved the fiasco, gave me an expansion opportunity within my department. I took on new projects, traveled frequently, and poured my energy into refining the skills that had made me financially successful in the first place: strategic thinking, meticulous organization, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. My career soared. I found a circle of supportive friends, real ones, not the flighty acquaintances who took sides with Damon or my parents to chase easy money. These friends helped me rediscover the joy in everyday life. I made subtle but powerful changes in my home, painting walls a vibrant shade I'd always wanted, redoing the yard with a new garden of fresh flowers, a symbol of starting over. I pinned a small plaque outside the front door, Bright Horizons, naming my home after the LLC that had shielded me from the worst. The scandal spread through my hometown, especially after the local news caught wind of the brazenly illegal house sale. My father, once a respected community member, found his reputation tarnished. My mother's friends drifted away from her. And Damon, well, Damon discovered that a man without moral scruples is also often without a safety net. He spent a fortune on legal fees and had to move in with one of his distant relatives after failing to maintain rent on a new apartment. Months later, I ran into Damon by chance at a coffee shop downtown. I was on my way out, juggling my laptop bag and a to-go cup, when I saw him standing in line with hunched shoulders, wearing clothes that were frayed at the edges. He recognized me and froze, looking stunned. Maybe he expected me to blow up at him or rub my success in his face. I simply gazed back, calm as ever. "How have you been?" he asked timidly, with a half-hearted attempt at a smile. I shrugged. "Better than ever," I replied truthfully. There was no need to gloat further. The way he looked at me with shame etched into every line of his face was vindication enough. He opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize or beg for something. I didn't wait to hear it. I just nodded a polite goodbye and walked away, letting the door close behind me. In the reflection of the glass, I caught a glimpse of his face contorting. Whether in regret or anger, I couldn't tell. The details no longer mattered. The man who had gloated that I could just buy another house was left with neither a stable home nor a partner to fall back on. Meanwhile, I climbed into my car, one I had recently purchased with my bonuses, and drove to my house, my real home, the place I defended tooth and nail. The freshly painted shutters gleamed in the afternoon sun as I pulled up the driveway. My new garden thrived with vibrant buds. I set my coffee down on the porch, inserted the key in the lock, and stepped inside, greeted by the sweet, silent reassurance that I was finally safe. I inhaled the scent of freshly cut flowers and new paint, and felt that sense of satisfaction only true vindication can bring. I had outmaneuvered a scheme that was meant to ruin me. I wasn't battered or bruised by the betrayal. In fact, I felt sharper, stronger, more capable. I had come out on top, not through pettiness or vengeful attacks, but through careful planning, smart execution, and an unwavering belief in my own self-worth. Yes, it still stung that my own parents had stooped so low. But as I surveyed my cozy living room, the large bay window letting in a wash of golden light, I realized I no longer felt that wave of hurt and bewilderment. Instead, all I felt was calm, a sense of contentment. This was my sanctuary, and I had fought for it. A final notification buzzed on my phone. It was Margaret. She just sent me confirmation that the charges against my parents and Damon were filed, and the buyer had received a full refund. The legal fiasco would take a while to fully conclude, but from my vantage point, everything was settled. I typed a short reply. Thank you, Margaret. Truly. Then I slipped my phone into my pocket and simply stood there in my house, letting the warmth and quiet envelop me. My parents had sold my house while I was on a business trip, thinking I could just buy another one. Instead, they had discovered, much too late, that I wasn't the pushover they believed me to be. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply reclaiming what's yours and thriving in the aftermath.